Rag and Bones Shorts, 1901. Written by Juliet Boyd. Narrated by the author. Copyright 2014 Juliet Boyd. Production copyright 2021 Juliet Boyd. (1901) Anna jumped. She couldn't be sure, as she'd been dozing off at that very moment, but she thought she'd heard a noise. It could have been the sound of her bedroom door clicking closed, yet nobody called out to warn her of their presence. Worse still, it could have been someone already in her room, however unlikely such a thing might be. A chill ran through her. She hated the fact that her father insisted she never lock the door, although after 19 years of such measures, she was used to the rules. They were, on the face of it, easier than coping with the alternative, but not safer, whatever he might think. She waited, trying to calm her breathing so that she could listen more intently, and so that any intruder wasn't alerted to the fact that she wasn't asleep. She knew that her hearing was good, better than that of most people, but even she couldn't hear very well with the blood pumping in her ears and her breaths as ragged as someone who'd sprinted up the driveway after a misbehaving hound. Oddly, she wasn't scared, even though this had never happened to her before. Disturbed would be a better word. She knew that all the external doors to the house were locked and bolted at dusk, and that the windows were closed even earlier. Her father had never taken any risks with her safety, as he saw it, and the servants had clear instructions on how to act when he was away. The likelihood of an intruder was slim, but not impossible. Her father wasn't at home. He'd been gone since Wednesday. He'd left the first possible moment he could after he'd heard that Queen Victoria had died. That was what being part of the government required. It was part of being a trusted politician. Although there was no immediate danger to the country, it was still a crisis for those who had to deal with that which followed. Anna tried to think logically. She knew she had to face this person, if indeed there was a person in her room, and there was only one way to do that, by taking the initiative. "Is that you, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth, or Lizzie as Anna called her when she wasn't feeling stressed, was her personal maid, but Anna considered her to be more of a friend. They had grown up together, being almost the same age, just 2 years between them, and Lizzie had been educated alongside her, even though that wasn't normal practice from what she'd heard. Lizzie was the daughter of Mrs. Glenn, the cook, and Mr. Glenn, the head groundsman. She was a constant companion to Anna, and did sometimes come to check on her at night, just to make sure that everything was all right, but she usually called out when she opened the door. "Elizabeth?" There was still no answer, but Anna was sure she could hear the sound of faint breathing, and not her own. "Is anybody there?" She reached out and her hand touched the cord that dangled above her bed. One quick tug on it would ring a bell downstairs, and someone would come running. She remembered once vowing never to use it, but that was when she was very young and saw it as an unnecessary precaution to the maintenance of her well-being. She decided against it. She was overreacting. She removed her hand from the cord and reached out again, but this time she picked up the wooden cane she always kept leaning against the wall by the side of her bed, and wrapped her fingers tightly around it. It was more for comfort than anything else, because she had no trouble finding her way around the room. It had been her room for as long as she could remember. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, pushed herself up and walked towards the door. It was closed, as she expected. A breeze, which was unexpected, caressed her cheek, and she swung around. It had to be coming from the window. She paced over to it and held her palm up. She felt the cold glass, slightly damp from condensation, and she gasped at the iciness. She felt around the edges. No, the window was closed. She shuffled around and headed for the door again. Another breeze ruffled her hair. She reached for the door, felt around for the key hanging on a string beside it, with thoughts of locking whomever it was inside and calling for help. Then stopped. "You're being silly," she said to herself. "You probably didn't hear anything. It was a dream that awoke you. Go back to bed. There's nothing here. If there were, you would know for sure by now." She took her own advice and lay down again to rest. She didn't hear another sound, and, soon after, her dreams took her to another world. Rag watched her sleeping until dawn. It wasn't where he'd expected to end up, in the bedroom of one of the privileged few, a young woman at that. He'd hoped the room would be as unoccupied as the last one along the corridor. Spending long minutes hiding had not been his plan. Neither had remaining in her company all night. But opening the door again, however easy, would surely disturb her and land him with hassle he didn't need. When he'd arrived at the grand manor house at the end of the drive, he'd knocked on the door to the servants' quarters after dark, pretending to be a lost traveller looking for some food and a bed for the night. He was hungry, that part was true, because in the country it seemed everyone stayed inside after dark, and there wasn't much opportunity for an unplanned meal. There had been one young girl still working there. From the way she came to the door with her sleeves rolled beyond her elbows and a mop in her hand, he assumed she'd been cleaning the kitchen floor. It seemed rather late to be doing that kind of work, but he really had no idea how the servants lived and worked in a place like this, although he might well have done if he hadn't been turned. It was a wonder the girl had opened the door at all, but he knew too well that tiredness sometimes caused you to make rash decisions. Hunger did, too. It had taken all his charm to get her to invite him in. His smile helped. The smile of an angel, with devil's undergarments. That was what an old friend had said once, even before he was turned. The girl had thought it adorable that he wouldn't cross the threshold until she said he could. She thought it was chivalrous and polite. He could almost see her heart flutter. If only she'd known the truth. He'd let her serve him with a plate of the finest food from the leavings of the upstairs table as an appetizer. He did still have a taste for regular food, and it wasn't often he got to eat the most succulent roast beef, and potatoes so crispy they crunched as you bit into them. She'd even poured him a tiny glass of port to wash it down with. And then he'd requested dessert. To say that she was unwilling to succumb to his advances would be an understatement. He'd locked his teeth onto her neck and was just starting to get his fill of her untainted blood, the food that really sustained him, when she'd managed to let out the most horrendously loud scream. The kind of scream that could wake up a whole household. It promptly fulfilled its potential. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the male members of staff immediately. He hadn't waited around for the fallout. He was a little sick of killing just because he'd been careless and forgotten to clamp his hand across the victim's mouth. He preferred having a reason, even if it was experimental. The quickest escape had been to run up the stairs, as the way back to the door opened onto the corridor and stairs to the servants' quarters, just where he didn't want to be. After reaching the more grandiose world of upstairs life, he opened the front door, very loudly, turned around and ascended another staircase. This time to the sleeping quarters of the masters and mistresses of the house. After a quick scan of the others, he'd chosen the room that was farthest away from where he started. the bedroom at the end of the corridor. Not one of the servants got anywhere near him. His speed has seen to that. He heard them out in the grounds, searching. Rag leaned in close to her face and studied it. He felt no compunction to feed again, even though he had barely taken a couple of mouthfuls from the servant girl. He knew why. She looked like a goddess, lying there on the pure white sheets, her golden hair falling across the pillows in soft waves. She was far too beautiful to use as a quick-stop feeding station. He did have some standards, even though they frequently slipped. He watched her sleep for hours on end. He was so distracted he didn't notice the slight glow of dawn in the distant sky. When he did, he cursed that he was going to have to wait another whole day until he had the option of leaving this house. He searched the room for somewhere to hide. He wasn't stupid enough to think that no one else would enter the room and that he could stay there without being seen as the servants began to go about their business. He chose a decorative screen in the corner of the room. It would shield him from prying eyes and from any rays of sunlight that pierced the curtains, and with any luck, no one would walk his way. If the worst came to the worst, and someone did see him, he'd simply have to make a run for it. About an hour after the sun came up, there was a quiet knock on the door, after which someone entered the room without waiting for a response. He peeked around the edge of the screen and saw a young woman wearing a white cap and a uniform similar to the one worn by the scullery maid, but she seemed a level above, both in the state of her attire and her demeanour. She was laden with clothes. "Miss," she said, gently touching the sleeping woman's arm. "Miss Anna." Anna. He had always liked that name. The woman he'd been watching the entire night stirred. "Lizzie, is it morning already?" "Yes, miss. Sun's been up an hour. It's not often you're still asleep when I come in, miss." "I was a little disturbed last night." "Oh, miss, they didn't wake you." "Who?" Rag's body tensed. "Well..." She paused as if not sure she should say anything. "That young Cathy, she swore blind there was this man in the house last night, attacked her and all. They kept searching outside till all hours. They found the front door open, but nothing much else." "Attacked?" "Yes, or so she says. The men couldn't find hide nor hair of him. They found a port glass on the table and the remains of a plate of fare too rich for the likes of her to be consuming. She got a right rollicking from Mr. Haynes for that, she did." "Oh, they think she was drunk." "Poor Cathy." "Poor Cathy. She deserves everything as she gets, as far as I'm concerned. It's a wonder they didn't send her packing at first light. I know one thing for certain. She won't get another chance." Rag smiled. It wasn't often he got off scot-free. "I hope they're right. Not that I don't believe Cathy, but the thought of an intruder scares me." "Yes, miss. Anyways, miss, I've got your clean things here, if you're ready to get dressed." "Oh, just put them behind the screen. I'll get dressed in a minute." "Right you are, miss." Rag forced the gasp back in and cursed his stupidity. He'd assumed the screen was decorative and nothing else. He crept round it as the maid went the other way. He could feel Anna's eyes boring into his back, even though he knew she couldn't see him. He reversed the maneuver as the maid finished. Then she went over to the window and drew the curtains back. He was pretty much trapped, as the sun was directly aligned with the window at that point, and streaming in, even if it was weak. I'll be back in a few minutes to do you up and bring you your cup of tea. Will you be breakfasting up here, miss? Yes, please, Lizzie. I don't fancy sitting at that great big table on my own. Just some toast and eggs, please. Right you are, miss. Cathy left, and Anna rose from her bed and moved behind the screen. There was nowhere for Rag to move to, and he couldn't close his eyes in case she came too close. He found that he was holding his breath. Anna still couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone else in the room, and the talk of Cathy's possible attacker unsettled her, even if no evidence had been found. But Lizzie had been in and walked around, and she hadn't said a word. Anna had to be wrong. It was some ridiculous fantasy that her mind had dreamed up, without telling her it wasn't reality. She removed her long cotton nightdress and placed it on the chair beside her, and she changed her undergarments before stepping into the dress that Lizzie had left. She pulled it up over her shoulders. It was one of her day dresses that wasn't as starchy feeling as her formal wear. She only wore day dresses when no guests were expected. Another of Father's rules. They had to keep up appearances. It felt better to be dressed, even if she couldn't string the hooks on the back by herself. She longed for the day when one of those newfangled class blockers her father had read to her about in the newspaper might be used instead of the complicated fastenings of her dresses. Without the benefit of a husband to help her, she always had to rely on her maid to get dressed in the simplest of things. She could hardly go wandering the upstairs of the house to find someone to help her, because she never knew when one of the men might be there, and coming across one of them when she was half-dressed would definitely not go down well with her father. He had somewhat of a temper, and he wasn't afraid to show it. No matter. There was no point in worrying about things she had no hope of changing. She would wait, and Lizzie would come, and everything would be fine. As she waited, she began to mull over the night's events again. She wouldn't say anything about her fears. There was no point, because most of them took the things she said with a pinch of salt. They thought that because she couldn't see, she was in some way deficient in her thinking. Her father didn't think that, but the servants most certainly did. Everyone but Lizzie treated her with kid gloves, and Lizzie, although much more natural in her presence, would still err on the side of thinking that Anna had imagined something, rather than believing her straight away. Another thought occurred to her. It was fanciful as thoughts went. What about the possibility that ghosts might exist, and that one had been in her room? If she expressed that thought, it really would cause whispers. She wondered if that particular thought was influenced by her love of that kind of tale. A Christmas Carol was one of her favourite stories, but she also liked the true-life stories that sometimes made it into print, or were passed around as rumours and whispers. Stories about ghosts that walked through buildings at night. There was one such story about the hostelry in the village. Not that it helped her situation. And then yet another idea occurred to her. There was one way she could try to find out if there were a spirit roaming the house, but she wasn't sure how she was going to achieve what she needed to do without somebody finding out. Was it wrong to watch someone undress when they didn't know you were there? Morally, that answer was clear-cut. Rag shook the thought out of his head. There were so many things he'd done wrong in this second life that this one ranked fairly low on the scale. He had distracted his eyes in uncharacteristic gentlemanly fashion by focusing on her mind. Anna's thoughts were fascinating. So fascinating that he was pretty sure he wouldn't be leaving this house that night, as he'd planned. It had brought out the mischievous side of his nature, especially that last thought she'd had. It turned out she believed he might be a ghost, and to her he probably was, in the loosest of ways, of course. It was such an opportunity for him to have some real fun for a change, away from Bones. If Bones didn't have an obsession with witnessing important events in history, they'd both be there together. No, that wasn't true. They would never have spent the night in this room, and certainly wouldn't have watched a lady undress. He could hear Bones' voice in his head right now. You did what? Rag had no desire to go to the city, and he wasn't sure how Bones was going to manage it with not being able to travel during the day. And what was he going to do once he was there? Hide in whichever abbey or cathedral they decided to use for the funeral? No. London was full of vampires, all competing for food and supremacy, or so he'd heard. It was not a place he wanted to be. While Rag was in this house, he was the one and only. He could decide exactly how his life was going to be, even if it was only for a few days. As long as he could keep out of sight of that pesky maid, he didn't have a thing to worry about. Making her way downstairs to the drawing room was a route Anna had followed so many times she really could do it without her stick to keep her balance. She knew what she wanted to do once she was down there, but she needed to do it while nobody else was around. Lizzie, especially, could be quite judgmental about things that she didn't agree with, and she didn't want to upset her friend. The drawing room was at the front of the house, to the right of the main staircase. The door was almost level with the end of the stairs, which was good and bad. If anyone was coming down the stairs, they might well see her, but she imagined the bulk of the staircase could also hide her actions. She didn't want to close the door, because that was more likely to direct attention to the room than anything else. It was another one of her father's rules. Don't shut yourself off from everyone with closed doors, the only exception being at night. He said he trusted her to be on her own, but his other statements often contradicted that sentiment. The large sideboard was along the left-hand wall as she walked in. It had 3 cupboard doors below the drawers. Behind the first one was the linen for the chairs, the antimacassars and a couple of small blankets for anyone who felt a chill as they sat. The second contained a selection of recent periodicals, which her father liked to keep so that he could refer to them for information pertaining to his work. But the third was the one that she wanted. It contained the parlour games. Most of the games were not ones she could participate in. Playing cards was nigh on impossible, unless someone whispered to her what cards she had, and everyone else pretended they hadn't heard. Chess was impractical because she couldn't keep the image of all the placed pieces in her head, or move them without knocking the other person's pieces over. But there was one game that she did enjoy. Anna reached into the cupboard and felt around for what she wanted. It didn't take long. The Ouija board was right on the top, with the pointer attached to it by a length of material tied in a bow. She had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and quickly secreted the board beneath it. She hoped that there was nothing sticking out to give her away, but she had no way of telling how she appeared to others. She walked back out into the hallway and made her way across to the central staircase, already breathing a sigh of relief. "Miss, was you going out, miss?" Anna started. It was Lizzie. She was obviously making an assumption about Anna intending to go out because of the shawl she was wearing. Anna didn't often wear one when inside. She also didn't often lie. It didn't come naturally. "I was thinking about it, but I'm not sure now. I think I'll leave it until later." She was sure she noticeably stuttered over some of the words. It seemed not. "That's a shame, miss. It's lovely out there now. Sun's shining and everything. My doll says it will turn later. You'd be much better going now if you want to take a walk today." "Thank you, Lizzie, but I'll take my chances with the weather." Her grip on the board tightened as she began to ascend the stairs. She could feel Lizzie's eyes following her as she took one step after another, trying to look relaxed and unconcerned. She imagined her friend was perplexed by her actions, but she was determined not to give up on her plan now. She continued on, despite her misgivings, and was soon back in her room. Alone? Maybe. She closed the door behind her and locked it. It felt defiant and dangerous to flout her father's rules like that, but there was no way she was risking someone else coming in with what she was planning to do. She removed the board from her shawl and placed it on her bed. Lizzie had already made it, and the blanket was as flat as the surface of a table. She ran her fingers across the numbers and the letters on the board. Her father had insisted that the letters be slightly more raised than normal when he had it made, so that she could take part in the game as well, although he had never actually let her touch the board when contact was being made. She touched the pointer, made in the shape of a heart. She held it up to her own. She couldn't believe that she was going to do this for real. She'd always suspected that the games they'd played at dinner parties were fixed in some way, that someone was pushing the pointer to make a message. Now, she was counting on the fact that they weren't.
Ouija board? Rag was careful not to say the words out loud, as a sense of disbelief and fascination clashed in his mind. He'd seen Ouija boards before, but he'd never played with one. There seemed something slightly off about a supernatural trying to contact other supernaturals by a circuitous route. He'd watched plenty, though. It was quite the craze. He'd observed all those people who didn't know what they were getting themselves into by trying to contact the dead, blithely ask all sorts of questions of those who were standing around watching them in various states of amusement. If only they realized how many forms of living dead there were, they might not be so keen to contact them. He was still located behind the screen, because sunlight continued to flood across the room, and would do so for an hour or so yet. There was no way he could move to any other part at that moment. Even rushing to the door and leaving would cause him a severe case of burnt skin, and he didn't want there to be any evidence of his presence when he next went out onto the landing. He watched as she gently put her fingers onto the pointer and closed her eyes. Surely she wasn't going to do this now. You were meant to wait until everything was dark. Of course, it made no difference to her. He heard her ask the question. "Who are you?" There was nothing he could do. He desperately wanted to give her an answer, purely to amuse himself, but there was no way he could risk it. He knew she was going to be disappointed. She asked again and again, and eventually she gave up. She secreted the board beneath her bed and unlocked the door, and then she left. "I'll take that walk after all," he heard her say as she reached the bottom of the staircase. When he was able to leave his hiding place, he reached under the bed and pulled out the board. He half expected to feel some power coming from it, even though he knew that was ridiculous. It was a piece of lacquered wood with a painted alphabet in rows, the numbers from 0 to 9 in a small semicircle at the bottom, and a yes and no, one on either side. He picked up the pointer and tested moving it around the board. It was just about big enough for what he was planning. If Anna put her fingers on one side, he could easily manipulate it to give her the message he wanted her to understand. But he would have to be careful, and he would have to concentrate. The least he could do was tell her the name of the person who was staying rent-free in her house. Now, all he had to do was persuade her to use the board again when she came back to the room, and that wouldn't be too difficult. He already knew what would pique her interest. In the meantime, he needed to find something to eat, and this time he would take better precautions. He opened the door a crack and looked out. There was nobody in sight.
It was a warm morning for the time of year, but there was a bracing breeze blowing across the lawns. No doubt that was a portent of the deteriorating weather Lizzie had mentioned earlier. The predictions Lizzie's father made were usually accurate. Anna walked down the main avenue. They called it an avenue, but it was really a pathway set to lawn with a row of majestic oaks either side. Lizzie had described to her how impressive it looked when the trees were fully in leaf, but she found it hard to imagine in the terms Lizzie described. It wasn't Lizzie's fault. Anna had been blind from birth, so she had nothing to go on besides descriptions that used the language of sight. Her perception of a tree was not anything Lizzie would recognise as such. There were minor variations of light in her world. At least, that was what she assumed it was. As for solid shapes, they were discerned by touch. They were rough and smooth, wet and dry, hot and cold. But many sighted concepts were lost on her. And it wasn't as if you could sample an entire oak tree with your hands, unless you were excellent at climbing. She walked over to the left and put her hands on one of the trunks. She tried to reach her arms around it, but that was impossible. She tried to reach up to touch the branches, but that was impossible too. Getting a mental image of people was different. She had a concept in her head of what her father's face looked like, from the contours she could feel when she touched his face, but it probably wasn't how he saw himself. She felt it in patterns. She knew there were 3 furrows in his brow, that his eyebrows were bushy, that his cheeks were full and round. He loved his food. That his nose was long, but not bulbous, and that his mouth was wide, his lips generous. She could recognise many of those features on her own face when she touched it, and that made her laugh. Lizzie, on the other hand, had petite features. There was nothing of note about her skin, except that it was extremely smooth and sat close on the structure of her skull. Lizzie worked too hard at a manual job to ever carry excess weight. Anna's mind turned back to the mysterious visitor to her room. Was it possible to feel the features of a ghost? Her sense of touch was more attuned. Maybe. No, that was a fanciful thought. Ghosts were mere whispers in the air. But she had heard tell of photographs where the image of a ghostly figure appeared in a window, and many tales of people who had seen ghosts wandering around their properties. If ghosts did exist, they had to have some kind of physical form. It might not be something you could normally feel, but was there even the slightest possibility she might be able to sense the ridges and the curves of a ghostly face? Even the thought of such a thing made her pulse race and the tips of her fingers tingle. Was it anticipation, or was it fear? As her father was wont to expound in his many lectures on the foibles of human beings, you could not tell the nature of a person by the curves of their face. Many a criminal looked like butter would not melt, but they had no compunction when ending the life of someone of far less amenable features. There was no reason to believe that ghosts would be any different. Good and bad, benign and evil. She clenched her fingers tight into a fist and wished like she did on her birthday candle. Please make it a good ghost. She didn't even hear Lizzie speak at first. She was so engrossed in her thoughts. Miss, can you hear me? Miss? You can't stay out here any longer. The storm clouds are nearly overhead. Did you not hear me? The breathless girl's steps came to a stop. No, Lizzie, I'm sorry. My mind was elsewhere. Well, miss, begging your pardon, but there's no time left for daydreaming. If we don't make haste back to the house, we'll be in for a drenching, and that's for sure. Give me your hand, Lizzie, and we'll run. Certainly, miss, but not too fast. We don't want you falling over on one of those blessed ornaments. Really, Rag should have gone back to Anna's room once he'd finished feeding on the stable hand who'd come inside for his lunch, and would probably get punished for taking too long. But he'd always loved exploring,
and this big old house with its nooks and crannies was ripe for snooping. There were so many places to hide, which made the thought of scaring people with his presence a joyous thought. He especially liked the idea that there might be secret passages hidden behind walls. Every large residence like this was supposed to have at least one, and if what he'd heard were true, it usually led into a bedroom. It made him wonder what their purpose had originally been. If it were up to him, they'd be used regularly to take his fill of nourishment from a beautiful woman's neck, without her knowing anything about it. But not Anna. She was different. She wasn't anything like the moneyed city women who usually fainted before they had a chance to scream. Country women were different. He ran his hands along the panels in one of the bedrooms, not Anna's, feeling for any slight give that might indicate an entrance. To his delight, he wasn't disappointed. Behind the bed, he found a door made to look like it was a simple continuation of the panels that made up most of the walls. The bed was pushed right up against it, so he assumed it wasn't used anymore, and that the current occupant of the room had no idea it was there. But he might have been wrong. He didn't know whose room this was, but it was fitted out in a masculine way. As far as he knew from the snippets of information he'd managed to glean from listening to the servants, Anna's father was the only resident male who didn't live in the servants' quarters. But he might have been wrong about that as well. He'd only been in the place one day, and there could be other siblings he didn't know about, who spent most of their time away from the family home. He climbed over the headboard and entered the hidden corridor. He closed the door behind him, but there were still cracks of light filtering through. The space was just about big enough for one person to walk along. It smelled musty, like somewhere not often used, and was dusty enough that he was certain it had never been cleaned in recent history. He held a handkerchief to his nose to stop an unexpected sneeze, giving away his presence. The short corridor headed towards the outer wall of the house, and then a spiral staircase led down a mere 10 steps with a door at the end. The height of the room below was barely enough for him to stand up straight. The door had no lock from the outside, and gave when he turned the handle. What he saw amazed him. There was a whole other room beneath the bedroom, except this one had no windows. It was difficult to see, but his extra sensitive eyes gave him a better view than most would have had of these surroundings. From what he could tell, it was fitted out more like an office, so perhaps someone had performed secret business transactions here. Things that they didn't want the authorities to know about, or the other residents of the house. He pushed forward towards a door at the other end of the room and went through that. And then another. This wasn't simply another room. This was a whole floor. If you were able to go without sunlight, you could have lived there for weeks, maybe longer. All in all, there were 3 small bedrooms, a pantry stocked with some well-past best food. Fossilized would be the best way to describe it. A kitchen where presumably only cold meats could be prepared, as there was no method of cooking available. A lounge space with a selection of reading materials. A whole cupboard full of candles and another of games. And the office he'd first seen. It had obviously been used at some point, because items were scattered around, but he had no idea when or why. This was more than a secret business transaction or two. This was a whole secret life. Beyond the kitchen, he found another staircase going up at the other end of the house. He took the stairs and walked along a similar short corridor until he found an identical door. He stood with his ear pressed to the wood and listened. When he was as sure as he could be that nobody was on the other side, he tentatively pulled open the door. Once again, the door was behind a bed. It was Anna's bed. It couldn't have been more perfect. He closed the door again and went down into the secret lounge. He could live here for months on end, and no one would ever find him. If he really wanted to. Anna sat alone eating her supper. The large dining room echoed every time she cut into her food with her knife, and the metal clattered against the china plate. It had been a busy enough day. After her walk, she had sat with Lizzie as she read Anna's current favourite Hardy novel out loud, and then they had gone out to the stables to make sure the horses were all right in the storm. The stable lad didn't seem to be on the best form, and she'd recommended that he take a nap to sort himself out. She didn't suppose he had. The evenings were the worst time when her father was away. Lizzie couldn't stay with her the whole time, and the hours seemed to drag out into infinitely long minutes. She missed her father so much. She missed his lively conversation about topical issues and their debates about the difficult moral situations he found himself in with his work, although he was always careful not to divulge anything to which she shouldn't be a party. She didn't expect him back soon. Being involved in government when the monarch of your country had just passed away was a busy time. She'd had one letter, which Lizzie had read to her under strict instructions not to repeat anything she found out from it. Sometimes she pitied Lizzie. She had to keep so much from her parents just because her mistress couldn't see. Anna ran her hand across the wooden surface of the table. She liked the way it felt so solid, as if nothing could move it without a lot of effort. She knew that if she stretched out both her arms, she couldn't reach from one side to the other, even though she was sitting at the head of the table, where her father would normally be. She'd first done that as a child. She'd never told her father that she did it as an adult, too. The dining room was large. It took 16 paces to get from her seat at the table to reach the door out into the hallway, another 25 paces to reach the stairs. She no longer counted. It was like her body knew where she was. Sometimes when they had guests, she reverted to using her stick. Other people were notorious for moving things around unexpectedly. It was safer to be cautious on those occasions. She got up from the table and picked up her stick. She was being cautious now. She'd heard of the stories of ghosts moving things around. She wasn't taking any chances. "You finished now, miss?" Lizzie said. "Yes, thank you. Tell your mother that I enjoyed the meal very much. The pork was extremely succulent." "Thank you, miss. I'll do that. Do you want me to bring you up some more milk later?" "No, I don't think so, not tonight. If you could just bring me a glass of water before I retire." "Certainly, miss. Straight away." She heard Lizzie go bustling off to the kitchen to get the water. She began to ascend the stairs. By the time she got to her room, Lizzie would have rushed past her and readied her room for the night. After undressing, Anna would be able to close the door without too much worry that Lizzie would try to get back in. She would still lock the door, but she wanted the likelihood that anyone would try the handle to be at a minimum. She felt nervous. Even though she had already tried the Ouija board once without success, there was something different about using one once the sky had become dark and the air chilled. Even if she couldn't see the dark, there was a difference to the way the atmosphere felt at night. It heightened her senses, and hers were heightened already. It was like every hair on her skin had become a receptor to change. She wondered whether other people felt the same way, but she had never asked. They might think her stupid to be so sensitive to her surroundings. Rag waited behind the screen until the servant had gone. She took the lit candles with her. There was no need to leave them. It was strange watching someone move around the room when there was barely light to see. He could do it, of course, like he had in the rooms below. but it was unsettling to see a mortal with such an ability. She was so elegant in the way she moved. There was no hesitation at all. She knew exactly where everything was that she wanted. She sat down at her dressing table to brush out her hair, and her hand landed straight on where the brush had sat on the surface. It was like there was a jigsaw in her head, and she knew where every piece was. The only thing she fumbled over a little was the exact place under the bed where she'd placed the Ouija board. Perhaps that was his fault. It was so dark that Rag wasn't sure he was going to be able to force the pointer to the letters precisely enough. The letters were painted in black. He wondered if he dared light another candle, but he decided against it. She would smell the burning flame within seconds, and she might call out. She placed the board on the bed as she'd done before. She sighed out a deep breath and placed the pointer upon it. He wondered what she was thinking, but he didn't listen in. He wanted it to be a surprise. This was a game, after all, and cheating just wasn't done in polite society.
Ghost, spirit, I don't know what to call you. I hope you're here. This board, it's for communicating between us. You see there are letters and numbers placed around it. If you could spell out the answers to my questions, I would be grateful. I know I'm asking a lot. Perhaps we could start with your name.
She placed the tip of her finger on the pointer.
What is your name?
How sweet was that? She was worried that her ghost didn't know what to do, because they hadn't replied when she'd tried earlier. It only endeared him to her more, which was unsettling. Rag leaned over and placed his fingers around the heart-shaped pointer. Her pressure on the piece was minimal, but he could feel a connection straight away. It was like their very essences were joined through it. He almost forgot what he was doing, until she asked the question again. He decided to use his real name for once. It was easy enough to direct it to the first letter, J for John. He could feel the shake in her hand. He paused and let her feel the board before continuing.
J,
she said.
O, H, N. John? Your name's John?
He whizzed the pointer over to yes and let it go. Her breathing became faster. He hoped she wasn't about to faint. He pulled on the pointer again.
B, E, A, U, T, I, F, U, L. Beautiful.
He forced the pointer back over to the U.
You? Beautiful you? Me? No, you can't be talking about me. I'm not beautiful.
He was sure she would be blushing, because she lowered her head.
Anyway, I want to talk about you. Why are you here?
Rag had spent the whole afternoon making up a fanciful story that would pique her interest. He'd been intrigued by the secret rooms and decided that he had been locked up there to die by an unscrupulous previous owner of the property. He'd looked at the portraits around and about and decided on the one he thought looked most evil, although he knew that largely depended on how good or bad the painter was. He'd probably picked the most benevolent person ever, but he didn't care. Trapped was the first word he spelled out. It felt mischievous, naughty, fun.
B-E-L-O-W. Trapped below. Below what?
Anna said. H-E-R-E.
You were buried beneath this building? Oh, my word, how awful.
No. I-N. Silently, he moved over to the head of the bed and pushed against the hidden door. He'd readied it so that it would open with a click at the slightest touch.
What was that?
He saw Anna's head turn so that her ear directed towards the sound.
Cold air. Where's the cold air coming from? Did you open a window? No, it didn't sound like a window.
Anna stood up and, after a couple of seconds of confusion, walked towards the source of the cold. She tentatively put her hands out, finding the hole in the wall. He thought she almost screamed, but stopped herself by placing her own hand across her mouth. He grabbed onto the ridges and the panels and pulled the door closed. She reached out again, this time finding no opening.
A door? Where does it go?
She rushed back over to the board and placed her finger on the pointer.
Where does it go? Please tell me.
ROOMSBELOW.
What rooms?
HIDDEN.
Hidden rooms? I don't understand.
TRAPPED. PUNISHED. He never got to the name of the perpetrator. She flipped the board over, clearly unable to take any more. She put her hand to her mouth and her other arm around her stomach. He thought she was going to be sick, but she kept it together. She didn't say another word to him, and neither did she sleep. She sat there, rocking back and forth, until the light began to filter through the curtains, bringing forth a new day. He wanted to put his arms around her and to tell her it was all right, that it was only a game. For once, he did think that maybe he'd gone too far.
After breakfast, Anna asked Lizzie to accompany her on a walk to the stream that ran along the south border of the property. She had been so tormented about what she had learned the night before that she hadn't slept a wink, but she had forced down some breakfast in case Lizzie thought she were ill. She didn't speak once until they were far enough away from the house that no one could possibly overhear a word they said. She had to find out the truth, and she knew the best way to do such things, no matter what the situation, was to speak to the servants. They always knew what was going on, or what had gone on in the past, even if they never said a word about it. Lizzie, I need to ask you something that could be considered a secret. A secret? Lizzie said. You want to tell me something that I can't pass on? That's easy, miss. We do that all the time. You don't need to say. No, Lizzie, that's not what I meant. I need to ask you about something you may have heard elsewhere, and to which I would like to know the answer. Oh, I see. She could tell that Lizzie was uncomfortable. She might be asking her to break the confidence of someone else, although she hoped that the question she wanted to ask was not of the kind that would put too much pressure of loyalty upon her maid. I heard the other day that the ghost of someone who was once trapped in this building roams the corridors. I was wondering if you'd ever heard anything of the like. Ghost, miss? Trapped, miss? Yes, I heard that there were secret rooms somewhere that this ghost frequented on a regular basis. Lizzie's breathing changed. Her voice lowered. I don't know as about any ghosts, miss, but I did hear of secret rooms once when I was barely old enough to understand. I never gave it much mind. It seemed impossible to me. I mean, where would you put 'em? I'm afraid I'm at a disadvantage there. They could be anywhere and I wouldn't know. Oh, sorry, miss. I didn't mean to say it like that. It's just that I can't imagine where there'd be the space. No, Lizzie, I know you didn't mean anything by it, but it's true. I cannot see what is before me, and I rely on others to do the looking. She turned back towards the general direction of the house. There's nothing odd about how the house looks, is there? Nothing unusual that would give you cause for concern. From the outside? Yes, Lizzie. I don't know as what I'd be looking for, miss. There are no windows that don't belong to a room. I know that for sure, because they gets cleaned from the inside and the outside and ticked off on the list. There's a list? Yes, miss. Housekeeper says she couldn't manage without it. Of course, that makes sense. I'm sorry, Lizzie. I shouldn't have asked you such a question. It was silly of me. It was only a rumour I heard. Think nothing of it. I could ask my da. He might know something. No, don't trouble him. It's probably better that we keep this to ourselves. We don't want to scare people. Scare? I's not scared. No, Lizzie, you're very brave. But some people might be. There are plenty in this world who don't like anything out of the ordinary. Lizzie touched her arm. It was a comfort. Right you are, miss. I won't say nothing to nobody. When they got back to the house, Anna went back up to her room. It was clear that the servants didn't know anything firm, or Lizzie would definitely be in the loop, given the fact that both her parents had been working for her father for many years. But that didn't help her trying to find out what John. It sounded strange referring to him as John, even in her head. But something had happened to him and she needed to find out what it was. It was probably why he was still around. He must have some unfinished business on this earth before he could leave. And now that she knew about him, she believed she needed to get justice for him so he could be on his way. But what was justice in his eyes? She should have asked him more, but she'd been so shocked by the few words he'd communicated to her that she couldn't continue. She took off her long jacket and gloves and threw them onto the bed. She decided not to lock the door in case she had to call out for help. Then she walked over to the headboard. The opening had been there. All she needed to do was find it. If what John had said were true, there would be a room beneath her own that nobody knew about. She pressed firmly against the panels one at a time, and she felt one give. Just a little, but enough for her to know that it was where the door sat. She pushed harder, and she heard the same click she had the night before. Her breath caught in her throat, as the door gave under the pressure.
The sound of the door opening echoed down the spiral staircase, and Rag's body immediately tensed. It was the door from Anna's room, he was sure of it. He'd half expected her to try to open it again, but he seriously thought she might be too scared. The way she'd reacted after realizing it was there the first time made him think that she wouldn't revisit any of it again. He'd been wrong. She was much stronger than that. He heard the tap-tap of her cane against the panels, and the muffled sound of her footsteps carefully edging along the corridor. Then a sneeze, no doubt caused by the dust she'd disturbed. This wasn't good. He had visions of her falling head first down the stairs, and no one ever knowing where she was. He'd developed quite an affection for her, unwisely according to his own opinion, and that wasn't the future he wanted her to have. He could stop her physically, but that would break the illusion he'd concocted for her about the mysterious ghostly John, and she would no longer trust him, knowing that he had a physical form. He stepped quietly to the bottom of the stairs and watched for the first sign of her descending. If she fell, he would catch her, and damn the consequences. "Who's there?" she called out. He looked down at his feet. He thought he'd been quiet. "John, is that you?" He almost answered as he saw her foot waver over the top step, but when he saw her lower her body to compensate for the drop, he decided to let her carry on. The worry was unfounded. He should have known that she would be more careful than anyone he'd ever known as she progressed along her way. He backed off into the small lounge. When she emerged into the space, he could tell that she knew she was in a room by the way her head turned from side to side. Obviously, she wasn't seeing anything, but maybe she was sensing the wider space. She tapped around until her cane hit a chair, and she reached out for it and ran her hands across it. She immediately leaned forward and found the small games table in front. She veered off to the left until her fingers sensed the softer material of a wing-backed armchair, and further still, till she came across the bookcase backed onto the wall. Her hands traced the outline of the books. Then she lifted up her cane and it hit the ceiling before her arm was anywhere near outstretched. She lifted her other hand, stood on her tiptoes, and her fingers traced their way across it. It took another half-hour before she'd explored all the rooms, and in all that time she'd never said a word. Not until she reached the staircase at the other side. "Where does this come out?" she said. He didn't think she was speaking to him. Clearly, she wasn't brave enough to find out the answer, as she turned to make her way back to her own room. When she got to the other staircase, before she went up, she turned towards him, exactly to where he stood, as if she'd known all along. "I will get you justice, John. I don't yet know what happened. I hope you will tell me tonight, but I intend to see to it that you rest in peace." When he finally heard the door close, Rags slumped down into the wing-backed chair. Rest in peace? What have I done? He wasn't feeling terribly proud of his actions. He decided there would be no more messages on the subject. At least, not from him.
"Have I offended you?"
Anna said. Rags stood watching as Anna asked question after question, to which he did not respond. She must have been trying for at least an hour in her attempts to get more information about the rooms on the secret floor, to no avail. He could see the frustration in her face, but he kept his resolve. There were to be no more lies about the place. He didn't want her going down there again when he wasn't around, and hurting herself, or worse, getting trapped like his imaginary namesake had been. He had no idea whether anyone who currently lived there knew anything about the rooms. It seemed unlikely, given their undisturbed nature. Eventually, she gave up. He watched her for some time after, as she tossed and turned in her sleep. He should have been honest and told her what he really was. Then she'd have gone screaming to her servant, and his path to her room would have been blocked. He would never have found the secret rooms. He would have left after one day. He would leave the next evening when he was sure she had got over her distress. If he stayed, he would only cause her harm.
It was around midday when Anna heard the carriage coming up the drive. She jumped up from her chair where Lizzie had been reading to her from the morning paper and ran over to the window of the drawing room. "Is it father?" she asked. "Yes, miss, it is," Lizzie said, now at her side. Anna rushed out to the front door and was the first to greet him.
"Anna, my dear, why the rush?"
She wrapped her arms around him and hugged him tight. "I've missed you." It was good to have him back home. With him in the house, she would feel safe again. Since the previous evening, when she had failed to communicate with her spirit friend, she had felt anxious and a little distressed. Now everything would be all right. And when her father was settled back in and had eaten a good meal to fortify himself, she would ask him about the secret rooms and their purpose, in the hopes that he might reveal the sad history that John had endured before his untimely death. "Tell me about your trip," she said. "Is everything all right in London?"
"Ah, if only I could speak about it to you, my dear, but you know what these matters are like."
"Yes, father, I know, but there must be something you can tell me. It can't all be secret."
"Well,
I can tell you that London is as busy as ever, and that I much prefer the serene surroundings here. I can tell you that there is great sadness amongst the people, and I can tell you that you are the most important person to me in the whole world." She playfully slapped her father across the chest. "I love you too," she said.
There was a peephole in the secret door at the other end of the secret floor. As Rag had expected, it was Anna's father's room it led into. As soon as he closed the bedroom door, the man's demeanour changed from the seemingly doting father in such an extreme way that she would have thought him a different person to the one who greeted his daughter on the doorstep. Rag had listened to that encounter from Anna's room, through the open window, which was to the far left of the main entrance. Her father's bedroom was on the far right, as far away as it could be. All those unused rooms in between seemed such a waste, if indeed they were unused. The man slammed down his bag in frustration. It seemed odd that he had carried it himself. Rag assumed that a man of his standing would leave that to the servants. But then he realised why. He pulled out sheaves of paper, all of which were official-looking documentation. He spread them across the bed. If he had been to London because of the death of Queen Victoria, then he had to be somehow involved in the politics of the country. But this seemed like more than just frustration with the difficulties of the death of one monarch and the coronation of another. Or maybe he was reading too much into the situation. Travelling in those carriages wasn't a pleasant experience when you had some distance to go, and the nearest station was a good 20 miles from the Grand House. It was even worse when you had to hang beneath one until you could overpower the occupants and the driver in the middle of the night. The man sat down on the edge of his bed and removed his boots. He promptly threw one of them across the room, letting it hit the wall opposite. He certainly had a temper, and was in a foul mood. Then he lay back on the bed, in amongst all the papers, and quickly fell asleep.
It was nearly time for supper when Anna's father entered the drawing-room. She knew it was him from the clomping sound of his heavy shoes. He didn't say anything to her, which wasn't unusual, but headed straight for the sideboard. He didn't usually get things out for himself, but she could hear him opening and closing the doors, looking for something, and grunting in frustration as he did so. She decided to intervene. "What is it you're looking for, Father?"
"A simple deck of cards. For the love of everything that is, do we not have any?"
"Games are in the farthest compartment, Father." She heard another door open and the subsequent scrabbling around. A satisfied grunt followed, and then something else she couldn't determine.
"Have you had guests while I've been away?"
His voice sounded almost accusing, as if such a thing were not allowed. "Guests, Father? Why, no. It has been exceedingly quiet while you were away. Not even a visit from Mrs. Arthwaite." With that, she heard his footsteps leave the room and disappear into the distance. There was scuffling and some muffled voices, followed by 2 sets of footsteps returning at a rushed pace. Anna stood up, but she didn't move closer. She wasn't sure what was going on and didn't want to get in the way.
"There," her father said. "How do you explain that?"
It was Lizzie who answered. "I don't know, sir. It was there, I know it was. I put it back myself after your evening with the Lord and his wife."
"And then you took it out again and used it. That's right, isn't it? You weren't expecting me back today, otherwise it would have been in its place. But I've caught you out, my girl."
"Stop," Anna said, unable to bear it any longer. "Tell me what's happening."
"Anna, it is none of your concern. Please keep out of this."
She stepped forwards with determination. "It is my concern if you're accusing Lizzie of something." She thought back to the night that Edward, the Lord, and his lovely wife, Katerina, had come to visit. They had spent a delightful evening consisting of a 4-course meal, followed by— "Oh," she said, "if you're looking for the board, I have it."
"Don't cover for her, Anna. It isn't ladylike. You may consider her your friend, but—"
"She is my friend, and I do have the board. I can prove it to you. Follow me." Anna thrust forwards out of the room and towards the staircase. "Come on," she called out. Her father grunted again, and she heard a gasp from Lizzie, the kind of gasp that indicated relief. He had probably held her wrist so tight that it caused the girl pain. Men were so uncaring in that way. They never realized their own strength. Her father passed her on the stairs and had already opened the door to her room by the time she got there. "Under the bed," she said. She heard the covers pulled back and some rustling.
"God damn it, Anna! Why in heaven's name?"
"I was trying to contact the ghost."
"What ghost? We don't have a ghost. Those boards aren't the real thing. You can't really contact the dead. You push the pointer without realizing it, and some people do it with realizing it. That Mr. Porter's a fine one for that. But that's not the point. It's dangerous to think that you can contact the dead. It does nobody any good at all. Did you know about this, Lizzie?"
"No, sir. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. His name's John, the ghost, and he lived downstairs in the secret rooms." No one said anything further for what seemed like such a long time.
Rag hadn't been expecting anyone to come back to the room this early in the evening, and his place behind the screen was becoming a little precarious. If Lizzie looked in the right direction, she was sure to see him. He tried to melt into the shadows, but he knew it wouldn't work. Anna's father looked odd. Not angry exactly, although he had definitely been that a few seconds earlier, but disturbed. He had been listening to the argument, and it was clear to Rag that the father knew about the rooms, because anyone who hadn't would have immediately responded with a "what rooms?" question. He didn't. The father stood there with his mouth open and no words coming out. The tension was unbearable. Then Rag saw something else. Something that he recognized in his own makeup. It was a build-up of anger and frustration and every other kind of negative emotion a person could have. His was heightened by his vampire tendencies. Anna's father's was all him on his own. He could see it happening in slow motion, the way the man's arm raised, the direction it was heading. He sucked in a breath. It wasn't much, but Lizzie turned her head towards him, and then a different look of horror crossed her face. She screamed. "A man!" A finger pointed to where Rag stood. There was no point in continuing to try to hide. He was the first to move. He took a step forwards around the screen. "Heavens!" Anna's father said.
"What is it, Father?"
"How could you keep a man in your room like that? Even a blind girl has a reputation." Her father's arm raised again. If it were possible to see red, Rag saw it. The speed of his decision was as fast as the speed of his legs. He took the blow upon his own face as he pushed Anna back down onto the bed. Then he set about dealing with the father. He transformed immediately, baring his fangs menacingly as he threw the man across the room, smashing him against the wooden panels. Anna's father collapsed down to the floor, a trail of blood dripping from a wound on his cheek. "What are you?" screamed Anna.
"He's a monster, that's what he is, miss," Lizzie said. "You come with me, miss. Let's get out of here."
Lizzie was brave, he gave her that. She held out her arm, trying to grab onto her mistress without moving further into the room, but she was too far away. Her actions had diverted his attention. He saw movement in the corner of his eye and turned back towards the father. "What's going on?" cried Anna, as Rag forced her father back against the wall again, and held him with a hand clasped to his throat, barely resisting the temptation to snap the man's neck right there and then for what he'd been about to do to his daughter. "Who was John?" Rag said through gritted teeth. The man's face was the palest colour it could be without death taking hold. Rag heard footsteps leave the room and assumed it was Lizzie. It was unlikely to be Anna going that fast, but he didn't turn. He kept the pressure on the father's neck.
"Please, tell me what's happening."
Anna sounded so frightened. Rag spoke. "Your father is going to tell you the truth." Her breath caught.
"Who is that?"
"No ghost," rasped the father. No ghost. But I have a feeling I stumbled onto something. Am I right?" The man nodded. "Then tell the story. We're both dying to hear it." "My throat." "I'll release my grip when you've said the words, not before." A hand touched his shoulder and he almost lashed out.
"Let him free,"
Anna said.
"I have locked the door. He cannot get out."
Rag turned. She was true to her word. The door was closed, and he was certain that if she said she'd locked it, she had.
"He cannot speak if you strangle him."
Rag's hand released from the man's throat, but he did not move away. He felt Anna's hand thread into his, and his fangs retreated. She had no idea what or who he was, and yet she was treating him like someone sane. Didn't she realize he'd been following her every move without her knowledge? That was enough to get him locked up in a civilized society.
"Let us all sit,"
she said, indicating the direction of the bed. It was like she had some spell over the both of them at that moment, because they both did as she asked. She sat between them.
"Now, Father, please tell me the meaning of the secret rooms and who John is."
Her father put his head in his hands. He began to tremble.
"Start with the rooms."
"My darling Anna, the rooms were always there. When my parents bought this house, they had no idea there was a secret living space included. No one knew. I discovered it as a boy and used to go there to play in the middle of the night, without the knowledge of my parents. It was my own little sanctuary. It was somewhere I could escape from all my siblings."
"You did have a large family."
"Then it was larger."
"John?"
He nodded. "John was younger than me by 2 years. He took away my favoured position when he was born, and I resented it. He didn't understand, of course. Why would he? I hated him in that way that only brothers and sisters can. All my parents' attention went on him, and I missed it. I felt lonely. Then, one day, I was playing in my room when I tripped and fell against the panels. I heard a click, and before I knew it, I was investigating the space beneath my room. I never planned it. You have to believe that. I never meant for it to happen."
"What, Father? What happened?"
"It was some time later, when John was 3 years old. He had spent the whole afternoon taunting me because, by then, he knew how much I hated the way he was the only one who was never ignored. I was at the end of my tether. I pretended that I wanted to play blind man's buff." Rag felt Anna flinch. "And I blindfolded him. Then, instead of turning him around, I led him into the passageway, and I pushed him down the stairs. I didn't mean to do that either, but he had begun to struggle, and it was only a small shove." Her laced fingers clung onto Rag's more tightly. "There were so many reasons why I should have got help, but I never did. When my parents became worried because he was missing, I said nothing. When they searched the house from top to bottom and couldn't find him, I said nothing. There came a point when I convinced myself that it was now too late to do anything anyway, and what would be the point of angering them by telling them the truth? If he were dead, and I was sure that he was, I would never be their favourite again. It wasn't until after my parents had died that I went down there again. All my sisters were long since married and residing elsewhere. The house was mine. I removed the body at night when the household was asleep. At least I removed the bones. I did bury them. It seems I left something. Anna's father spoke as if burying the remains of his brother negated everything he'd done before.
"Oh, Father,"
she said. Rag wasn't sure whether it was an exclamation of distress or sympathy. He was so caught up in the story and his fortuitous choice of using his own name that he forgot where he was. He didn't notice when the father got up. "Don't move," the man said. He held out a pistol that he must have had hidden in his jacket. What kind of a man kept a gun upon him in his own house? "Are you this so-called ghost?" he asked. "And what if I am?" Rag said. "Well, you're not my brother, I know that. You... It was like the man couldn't get the words out. "How did you find out about John? There was no paperwork, I made sure of that. There was no evidence of a body. There was nothing, not after nearly 50 years. Rag smiled. "Your sins always find you out. Isn't that what you religious people say?" "You're one of those non-believers." "You could say that." Rag nodded at the gun. "You'll never be fast enough to kill me." "You think you can draw faster than I can shoot?" "Not exactly," Rag said. "But I wouldn't tempt fate if I were you." It was a choice, die or not, for both of them. The man was at an unfair disadvantage, not knowing what Rag was, but Rag didn't care. The second he heard the pistol's mechanism click, Rag grabbed Anna around the neck. He held her in front of him to act as a shield. Hypocritical, given his recent actions? Yes. Characteristically vampiric? Most certainly. He made the assumption that the man did actually love his daughter, even if he didn't always show it. "I wouldn't shoot now if I were you." "Leave her alone." A key clicked in the lock and the door opened again. Lizzie stood sobbing with her parents behind her, but they all remained static when they saw the scene, not knowing what to do. Rag backed up towards the window and reached out his arm. He found the catch and pushed the window open. Then he sat on the sill. Anna was still in front of him. He twisted around faster than an eye could see, pulling her with him, and jumped. He landed easily enough in a crouch, but Anna didn't fare so well. Her legs were twisted behind her at an unnatural angle, and her neck had been crushed by his grip on impact. From the sound of her breathing, he realized she didn't have long. This wasn't how he had wanted things to end. But when it came to his survival over someone else's, there was no contest. He thought about siring her. He had no wish to see her die, and if he could have been sure her eyes would have healed, he would have done it. But hers was a genetic difference, not an illness, and he was certain that a vampire without sight would not last long. "I'm sorry," he said. "I never meant for this." She gasped in some air.
"How did you know about what my father did?"
she said. "I didn't. My name's John. I thought you wanted a story." I made it up."
She almost laughed. "Then what you said was true. His sins found him out."
He brushed the hair from her face as she took her last breath. She really was one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen. He laid down her head against the ground with the softness of someone who cared for her dearly. And then he disappeared into the night. It was a blessing that he had never had to tell her what he truly was. He wasn't sure she'd have been that forgiving.
The end.